the number one problem that organizations tell us they have is communication. And what they do not mean is a employee newsletter. It's the ability to understand in a cohesive way what we're trying to accomplish, and that the team is moving together and the sum is greater than the parts.
Welcome to The Leader's Mindset, where we bring you conversations with leaders who are making an impact in business and our communities. Today, I'm here with Andrew Oxley. He's a nationally recognized author, speaker, and executive coach, and the founder of the Oxley Group. Thanks for being here today, Andrew.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what I want to start off with today, when you and I talked, I think it was a couple of months ago now for the first time, I want to start with, tell us why the best leaders don't try to be heroes.
Yeah. And, let me step back for a minute. A lot of the work that we do is to try to create memorable anchors to hang complicated concepts off. And so leadership is a complicated concept. And the only people who think leadership isn't complicated is the people that perhaps have not led for very long. Once you've been a leader for a little while, you're like, dang, this is more complicated than I thought it was. So one of the concepts we teach is a concept called the hero, the villain, and the guide. And we say that when your employees arrive home at the end of the day, someone says to them, "How was your day?" I'm sure someone's asked you that question, Jason. And, when we ask that question, sometimes we want an answer and sometimes we really don't. We're just being polite. But when your employees tell the story of their day, you're present in that story in one of three roles. You're either the hero, the villain, or the guide. And so as a leader, when you are the hero, essentially what you're doing is you're directing a lot of what goes on with your employees' lives. You're rescuing them sometimes. Sometimes you're not expecting very much of them because they're a little overwhelmed with what they've got going on. Sometimes what you're doing is when they have good ideas, you take the good idea away from them. Maybe it's a 60% good idea and you buff it up and you give it back to them. And now it's a 90% idea, but it's not their idea anymore. Now it's your idea. So the hero is sort of robbing an employee of their agency. And they don't really feel like they have a lot of contribution into what's happening. I mean, they're basically a bit player in your story. Now, the other role you could be playing is the role of the villain. And I've never had a leader actually self-identify as a villain because although in the movies villains are evil, villain bosses aren't evil. But they're very high on accountability. They push really hard. They're not very supportive. They just want you to figure it out. If I have to tell you how to do your job, then I probably hired the wrong person, sort of approach. And the problem with that is, of course, that the only accountability that truly exists is accountability that comes from within. So I can't really hold anyone accountable. All I can do is create an environment where people should want to hold themselves accountable. So villain bosses are out there, and everybody's had a villain boss or knows of somebody who's had a villain boss, sort of the hard ass who just sort of hammers people to get things done. People know hero bosses, but what we really want our clients to be is the guide. And the guide is the one that when we ask people to tell us about their best boss. So have you always been self-employed, Jason, or have you been, employed by other people at times?
I mean, since I've been out of the Air Force, I've been self-employed. So really, I had high school and college jobs, the Air Force, and then entrepreneurship.
Okay, well, when you were in the Air Force, did you have some villain bosses?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, do you have some hero bosses that sort of was always trying to rescue everybody and not very nice to work with, but didn't necessarily give you a lot of agency to do your own thing?
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, when I was a young captain, I was kind of a hero boss and had to learn that you can't do what you need to do as a boss if you are trying to be the hero as well.
That's right. So just in your personal experience, you can sort of see those two extremes. But I bet your best boss was a guide. They were probably hard to work for. They expected a lot of you, but they supported you. They coached you. They believed in you. Did you have a boss like that?
Yeah, I had a few, and they were really great. Yeah, the best bosses were, and they spent a lot of time doing the guiding, and
Right.
then saying, okay, go forth and do good things, and don't come back until you have more to talk about. So
Right. So when we ask leaders what kind of role they play, most people say I'm the guide. And I always say, I know you think you are, but being a guide is an ideal. It's not really a goal because it's hard. Leading people is difficult, right? So, what I find is most leaders spend some time in guide mode, but a lot of they spend time traveling between the villain and the hero. In other words, they try to believe in people and encourage them, and then they get frustrated and they flip over to villain mode for a little while, and then they feel guilty they're being the villain, so they go back to being the hero and so they spend a lot of time traveling between those two roles. And the guide is a balance of the two of them. It's where you're holding people accountable to reasonable standards of performance, but you're supporting them in the journey that they are trying to make, not that you're making them go on. And so that's one of the concepts that we hang stuff off of. So when I'm coaching people, I'll often say, so what role are you in right now? If they're having difficulty with a particular employee, I'm like, so what role are you playing with them? Well, I think I'm being the hero. Okay. So is that the role you want to play? Well, no, I want to be the guide. Well, what are some things we need to do differently to move you from hero to guide?
yeah, and not just from hero to guide, from villain to guide. Sometimes, they're very extreme cases. They exist in the military. I don't know if they exist in the corporate world, not really having been it. But sometimes you have a unit that is performing really poorly. And if you remember the movie 12 O'Clock High from way back in the day, Gregory Peck, Frank Savage comes in and he's the villain. He's got to get this unit turned around. But as the movie progresses, he turns more into the guide. And then, of course, it's a movie, so also the hero. But I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes you have to be the villain.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you say that because I think that I actually had a client challenge me on this and say, don't you just sometimes have to be the villain? And I think if we characterize the villain as somebody who's very tough on the people they're seeking to lead, then that you can be the guide and still be very tough on people. The story I often tell about this is my wife and I have 4 children. Do you have kids?
No.
Okay. Well, we got 4 kids, and when your kids are young, you are sleep deprived and you are not always at your best, right? And so this one particular day, my wife had left me alone with the children for some reason, and I was very, very tired and very short on my temper. And I remember sort of losing my mind with the kids. I'm not sure what they could have possibly done. They were all under the age of 8. So whatever it was not nearly as bad as what was about to happen later in life. Because kids don't become simpler as they get older. And I remember thinking, as I watched them on the couch, their eyes are as big as saucers, like Dad is such a villain, right? And if you were to go in a time machine and ask me back then, did you have to be a villain? I would have said, yeah, I had to be. That's what I had to do. What else was I supposed to do? But the truth was, knowing what I know now, I didn't have to be a villain. I just didn't know how not to be. I didn't know what else to do, right? So being tough on people doesn't make you a villain. A villain is somebody who is allowing their emotions to drive their reactions. And so, a lot of times clients will ask me, is it ever okay to be angry with your employees or get mad or raise your voice? I'm like, absolutely. Just be in control. Like, don't lose control. Don't allow your emotions to dictate what you're saying. Think through what you're going to say. It's okay to be forceful, right? There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there are certain employees, if you're not forceful, they won't listen to you. So, that probably was the Gregory Peck situation, right? He had to be very strong with them because, people die in the military when they don't have good discipline.
Yeah, as I said, in the military, we have some of these unique situations. I'm not sure there's a direct translation to the civilian world on it. Now, you work with high-growth entrepreneurs and organizations. What are some of the unique challenges to developing leaders in a company that's growing really rapidly?
Yeah, first of all, I've never been in an organization that has too many leaders, that being. I never hear that. So when an organization is growing rapidly, there's only 2 ways to handle the leadership demand, and that's hire the people from outside which has its own set of challenges because you might lose control of the culture of the organization, or you develop them from within. And the problem with developing leaders from within is that although the entrepreneur may know how to do it, although I would argue very often does not know, because they are what we call unconscious competence. They're good at leadership, but they don't know why they're good at it. But even if they know how to lead effectively, they don't have the time to develop the leaders. So they need some sort of system in order to systematically grow leaders. Because when an organization's growing quickly, you have to have more leaders. What happens a lot of times is that problems start to bubble up through the organization, back to the CEO, back to the founder, back to the executive leadership team, not because you don't have good people, not because they're not talented people, just because the pace at which the organization is changing has overwhelmed the leadership team. And so we really need to continually feed the leadership engine of the organization if we want to continue having a scalable organization versus just a growth organization. I mean, growth is where things get more complicated. Scale is where things stay a little simple as you get bigger. Or not a little simple, they stay simple.
Yeah, and a lot of the conventional wisdom on whether you're talking growth or scaling is just do it. It's just grow, traction, increase revenue. Ideally, that increases profit, but not necessarily, especially if you're in tech. And a lot of companies will pursue scaling or rapid growth at all costs. What are the downsides of that approach? And what's your advice for companies on when they should seek to grow fast?
Yeah, well, there's lots of times that, and you mentioned tech. I mean, tech's a great example where sometimes you have to get to a certain scale in order to be profitable. So that would be a very sort of an outlier case. I think when you have the ability to scale versus just grow, then scaling makes sense. Simpler is harder than complex. And what most companies do when they're growing is they start doing a lot of stuff. And when you start adding extensions to your product lines, it just makes the business far more complex. So what we're often trying to do is we're trying to skinny the product offering down or the service offerings down so that it's a very simple sort of menu. So great example of this. I don't know if you're familiar with Cane's restaurants. They basically have one thing on the menu. They have chicken tenders, and French fries, and their own coleslaw, but that's it. And I was listening to an interview recently with Todd Graves, who's the founder, and he's a founder-led it's a founder-led company. I think their valuation now is around $20 billion, and all they serve is chicken tenders. And he's like, all sort of people are saying, you can't just serve one thing. And he fought that fight for the first, 5 years of the restaurant until he could prove that, yes, you can. Our menu's simpler, our training times are simpler, our drive-through lines are shorter, all because we kept it simple. Now, complex is actually easy. Simple is hard. So if you've got a simple offering, then I think it makes sense to grow.
Yeah, Cane's is a local favorite here in Las Vegas. I can count 4 of them within 3 miles of my house. So we're all very familiar with Cane's in Vegas. It's a local favorite. What can early stage startup founders who are thinking they want to do rapid growth in the future, what can they do to set themselves up for success as leaders and set their teams up for success now when they're in that, it's a founder and a co-founder and maybe a couple of other people stage?
Yeah. And well, the idea is that if I add people, I can become more productive. And the problem with adding people, the complexity of the organization goes up exponentially. So you have to be very careful. We actually have a concept called the 7 stages of CEO freedom. And the critical stage, and it's not based on number of employees, it's based on the cohesion of the leadership team, because you start with a startup where somebody's got a great idea, right? And then you move to ramp up where we start to actually get some traction in the marketplace and we hire a few people. Then you into multiplication where we start hiring a lot of people. The next stage is what we call team acceleration. In between multiplication and team acceleration is where most entrepreneurs get into trouble, because they keep adding people. They're still in the multiplication phase, but because their organization is becoming more complex with all the people, the actual output of the organization does not go up that much. So for your listeners, do a little experiment. Just draw a circle and put 2 dots, one on either side of the circle, and draw a line between. That's an organization with 2 people, 1 line of communication. 3 people, there's 3 lines of communication. 4 people, when you put 4 people in an organization, now you've got the 4 lines that complete them, and then you have 2 more lines, okay? And so when you get 5 people in an organization, I mean, the complexity starts to go up like this. You get 6. If you get 30 people in an organization, it's hundreds of lines connecting people. And so the reason why when we talk to organizations, the number one problem that organizations tell us they have is communication. And what they do not mean is a employee newsletter. It's the ability to understand in a cohesive way what we're trying to accomplish, and that the team is moving together and the sum is greater than the parts. That's when you've moved from multiplication to team acceleration, because the team is accelerating in a particular way. So what I would say is, if you're an entrepreneur and you feel like you are the bottleneck, in other words, everything's flowing through you, you have not reached team acceleration for sure. You have to have other members on your team, and you guys all understand what's happening, and you're managing either functionally or you're managing in some sort of a matrix way the people on your team.
Do you have any advice for these early stage founders? Because they're getting asked all the time by investors, what's your funding plan? This is your seed round. What's coming up for Series A? What's coming up for that? What's your exit strategy? What advice do you have for early stage founders on developing their funding plan and their exit strategy?
Well, so, Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind, right? So if you think about where you want to get to, the venture capitalists always do not have your best interest in mind. What they want you to do is they want you to sell when the multiple that they have to pay for your business is lowest. And there's a concept in business growth called the squeeze. And the squeeze is where things get incredibly complex at a particular point. And this is depending on the industry that you're involved in. And it's where it's the most painful for an entrepreneur. And it's usually where they do one of 3 things. They either sell, they stall the business and shrink it back to a lower level, or they sabotage it by doing things that they should not be doing. The venture capitalists know that this is when they want you to sell, because they know that if you can get through the squeeze, the market's going to pull you to a higher level. So when you're the longer you can hold on without seeking that external next round of funding, the better off you're going to be. The problem is we think that if I could just hire a few more people, this would be so much easier. Going back to the concept I just covered, that's not always true, right? So you don't always hire more people and make your system less complex. Quite often we make it more complex.
Now, a lot of leaders out there, they achieve a level of success doing really great work, either as an individual contributor or, kind of in the first line of leadership, like a manager. And then they often get stuck in the same way of doing things. What are some barriers that might be holding us back from truly achieving our potential as leaders?
Yeah, so we have a concept we teach called the ceiling of complexity, and it operates for companies and individuals. So here's how you've reached a place where you have to change your leadership. And you say these 4 words that you've probably said, I've said at different times in my career. I have no more time. I've run out of time. Okay. Now, the reason we've run out of time is because the strategies we're using to address the challenges that we have in front of us have taken us to a particular level, but they will not take us beyond that. So as leaders, we have the ability to multiply ourselves through the efforts of others. We have to examine our skill. We have to examine our behaviors. And we have to examine what we value, because if I value my success rather than the success of my team, it's going to retard my progress. If I have not develop the skill of delegation, time management, collaboration, empowerment, strategic thinking, it's going to limit my success. And the thing that we see leaders doing quite often is that they think that mastering the skill at one level means they've mastered the skill. They've mastered the skill at the first line level of leadership. But when you go to the next level, the same skill requires more aptitude from them, more ability. So time management, for example, as you progress through the Air Force, I'm sure you had different points where you were really good at managing your time, and then you maybe got a promotion to a different rank, and you're like, oh crap, I'm not very good at this at all anymore, right? So part of the challenge we have as leaders is to not assess our skill level against our current reality, but against the next level that we want to get to. And time is always the barometer. When you run out of time, it means that there's a skill that needs to change and behavior that needs to change, and a way you're valuing your output or your time that needs to shift.
Yeah, and what are the advantages of making that shift? One, you make your life a lot easier because you figured out how to manage your time better and use your time in more effective ways. But we're also developing leaders for the future by delegating, by giving up some of that control. We're creating a way for us to leave it better than we found it when we move on to a new opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. And part of the challenge when you're developing the people underneath you is that there's two problems. First of all, it's always hardest to teach a skill that you're naturally good at. So if I'm naturally collaborative, if I'm naturally good at managing my time, we have a tendency to use what I call the Nike philosophy of coaching, which is just do it. And what follows the word just is usually a strength for the person giving the advice and not a strength for the person receiving it. So if I'm really good at managing conflict, I'm like, well, you just gotta jump in and do it. And the person I'm coaching is like, yeah, how? I'm like, what do you mean how? You just do it. I'm like, okay, but how? Like, there's a process. I just don't know what the process is because it's a natural strength for me. Or maybe I've been doing it for so long, I've forgotten what the process is. So that's the first challenge we have with developing people, is that we're maybe not very good at coaching because we don't understand the process. The second problem is that a lot of the skills we're trying to develop in our team are subjective in nature. In other words, how good are you at collaboration? Well, I think I'm really good. Compared to what? So if I rate myself on a scale from 0 to 10, I say, well, I think I'm a 7. Well, that predisposes that, or has the assumption that we both have what in mind the same picture for a 10. Well, probably not, right? If I'm first line leader, I think a 10 is here, and my manager probably thinks a 10 is way over here, right? So I may think I'm a 7. Well, I said, well, I don't think you're a 7, Andrew. I think you're actually a 4. So we have a disagreement about that, which is completely unnecessary. So we teach a skill called making the subjective objective, right? And so if you say to me, Andrew, how good are you at collaboration? I say I'm a 7, and you think, oh, hell, you're not a 7, you're a 4. Rather than arguing that with me, what you say to me, well, Andrew, what would a 10 look like? Well, either I know or I don't know, but either if I don't know, you can help me understand, here's some things I think you could do differently. And if I do know, you can elicit a commitment from me on some things that I can do differently. Now, there's only 2 dangers with using the 0 to 10. Number one, that the person rates themselves too high. So if they rate themselves a 10 and you know they're not a 10, you got to have a conversation. If they rate themselves a 9, it means they wanted to say they were a 10, but they know they shouldn't, so they rated themselves a 9, and you got to have a conversation with them. But if they rated themselves anything 8 or less, what you can say is, what would a 10 look like? Because there's a gap. And all we're trying to do is get someone to grow into the gap. So those are the 2 big pitfalls I see when we're trying to develop people underneath us.
That's fantastic. All right, I want to take a break from the leadership questions. I want to play a game with you. Are you up for a game?
I am.
All right. The name of this game is Rapid Response. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to respond with the first thing that comes to mind.
All right.
Don't be fooled by the word rapid. We don't need one-word answers here. Elaborate as much or as little as you'd like. We just want to get to know Andrew Oxley a little bit, okay?
Yep.
All right. Andrew Oxley, rapid response round. Your time begins now. A podcast recommendation.
Simon Sinek.
Good one. What is a practice you'd like to see more people embrace?
Self-awareness. And what I mean by that is, for most people, they're not very self-aware. But we think we are. So I often ask people, who do you know that will speak the truth to you with love? They don't offer you what we call the cold comfort of validation, which means they tell you you're wonderful. And we call it the cold comfort because it doesn't help you grow. You need people who will speak the truth to you and challenge you to get better.
Absolutely, and I think it's really great that we need to be self-aware about our self-awareness.
True.
It's what's the saying? It's turtles all the way down.
That's right.
Who is someone we should all be paying attention to?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know if there's a blanket answer for everybody, but I would say find somebody who's a giant in your industry, who has walked the path you're trying to walk, and pay attention to them. I mean, if Warren Buffett walked to the room right now, greatest investor that's ever lived, and I wasn't ready for him to walk in, I wouldn't know what to ask him. So be prepared with really good questions that you could ask somebody who has the knowledge. Because there's only two ways to learn anything: the school of hard knocks and from the experience of others. And the second way is a whole lot easier than the first. But you gotta know what you're gonna ask them. Don't ask superficial level questions like how'd you get your start? What do I need to do differently in order to be successful? Because the things they're gonna tell you are probably not complex. They're just hard to do over and over and over. And so have really good questions available.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Finding someone in your industry to pay attention to, I think it's really, really important. One of the things I have found, both in my time in the Air Force and since I've been out working with companies and young leaders in those companies, is a lot of people don't have really good knowledge of what's going on in their industry. They know what's going on in their corner of the world. They might know what's going on in their company, but they aren't really aware of the major forces and trends that are shaping their industry. And without that knowledge, it's really hard to shift your thinking from day to day to a strategic level. So I think that's a really great piece of advice: is pay attention to someone in your industry and what they're talking about.
Yeah. And if you don't know who that might be, open up your favorite AI engine and say, hey, this is what I do for a living. Who are 5 people that are giants in my industry that I could pay attention to? And then, and I don't know if you've ever shared this with anybody, but it's not a secret, but you could create a little board of advisors with those 5 personalities and create a little thread in ChatGPT when you're facing a problem. Say, I want to bring this to my board of advisors, and each one of them, like Steve Jobs, this is what Steve Jobs would say. This is what Bill Gates would say. This is what this person would say. But have your people.
Yep, great advice. What is either your get pumped up song or your walk on music?
I don't know. Let me think about that for a minute. I know it's supposed to be rapid response. Probably the music that I would probably choose is not entirely appropriate. I do like the song Hell's Bells by AC/DC. I just love the start of that song. It's pretty slow, but that would be my that song. I don't know if it's just because I was a teenager when that song came out. I just love that song.
That is a really great start to a song. It is not fast, and it wakes you up. It gets you going. The biggest influence in your life?
Without going spiritual, I would say my wife. And if you're a young person listening to this podcast, the person you marry is going to have either the biggest positive or negative influence in your life. And so choose wisely, because the spouse you choose can make a massive difference in the direction of your life in a positive or a negative way.
What is a book everyone should read?
Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Good one. Your favorite springtime recreational activity?
The one I end up doing all the time, or the one I would prefer to do?
Tell us about both.
Well, I prefer to go skiing, but my wife does not like the cold. So she always says we should go on a ski vacation. And I said, we should do that. And then she said, but not this year. Let's go to the beach. So we end up at the beach.
And following up on that, what is your dream vacation spot?
I actually had the opportunity to go and rent an overwater hut in Jamaica. And that to me was the most relaxing vacation I've ever had in my entire life.
It sounds great. It does sound very relaxing and quiet. What is a trend you're excited about?
I'm excited about the influence of AI on the ability to have us challenge our thinking. Remember I said one of the biggest challenges was self-awareness? So AI is such a objective evaluator. So if I'm a big fan of a concept popularized by Brad Smart and his dad. They run a consulting group called Smart and Company, and he talks about being an A player in your field, right? An A player is somebody who's in the top 15% of for a comp level in any position. These are the dream team that we'd love to have working for us. And he said, so one of the things that I believe is you can go on to any AI engine and say, if I'm an A player, what are the competencies, key accountabilities, and key performance indicators that I should be able to achieve? And it will spit it out for you for your position, and then you can go and evaluate yourself on that. You can have the AI engine interview you about where you are in terms of your abilities and your results, and it will give you a rating as to how you're doing. So that's just one thing. We're also using it in strategic planning with organizations where we have it challenge the thinking of the executives in the room. So we all get in our box, right? And so this is a way to get people outside of their box without them even realizing that it's happening quite often.
Yeah, it's amazing what we can get AI to challenge ourselves with and to use as a mirror to look back at ourselves. It's really great. And it's gotten really good the last couple of months with that. It was kind of okay last year. It's gotten really good the last couple of months at those kinds of tasks. Last one, favorite sports team or player?
Without question, the Montreal Canadiens, which for those of you who don't follow hockey, which Vegas has got a good hockey team. So they're obviously a professional hockey team. They're one of the original hockey teams. And so I grew up being a fan of the Montreal Canadiens. My favorite player right now is, I think his name was Fernando Mendoza. He played for in the national championship game. I think that kid is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for playing our game. It's nice to get to know you a little bit in a way our other questions might not do for us. So you've talked a little bit about some of the skills you help people with. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other foundational leadership skills that we all need to develop to become leaders at the highest level?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is sometimes hard for leaders, is that they fall into the trap of believing that the things that are their strengths don't have a dark side to it. And I think, the more successful we become, the more we fall into the trap of believing I am successful because of who I am. And I'll give you an example. If I'm a very assertive leader, very decisive, that will take me to a certain place. And then it starts to retard my progress in certain areas. Because at some point, it's not about me anymore. It's about how I can bring other people along with me. So understanding that every strength has an attached weakness. And so what's the dark underbelly to the thing that helps me be successful that I have to manage? And if I don't manage it, it will actually undermine my future success.
Yeah, and I think decisiveness is a great one to talk about, because I think we all really respect decisiveness in leaders, but there's a really fine line between decisiveness and impulsiveness. And I think that's and I've seen that in myself, so that's why it's such a resonant example for me. But one of the things I'm really curious about, to pull on that thread a little bit, we talked about being a guide, not being the hero, not being a villain. One of our most important jobs as leaders is to develop the emerging leaders coming up behind us.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to guide a young emerging leader who might be facing this decisiveness / impulsiveness challenge?
Yeah, and one of my favorite questions to ask leaders when they're, hyper decisive is, what are the unintended consequences of that decision? What are the unintended consequences? And usually that'll stop them up short. They're like, I don't know. I said, well, you should go think about that, because there's always unintended consequences, right? What could go wrong with this decision? One of the things I had to learn early on is that I have just a capacity to believe that the future is going to work out that rivals almost anyone. I mean, it's all wonderful, and it's always going to be wonderful. But that's not the real world. And so when it comes to leading others and developing leaders, you have to understand that every leader has a preoccupation with either the future and everything's going to be wonderful, or the current situation and damn, it's not very good right now. And as leaders, we have to balance the two of those. We have to figure out how to stay connected to the reality of what's happening while believing in the future and that it's going to get better. If you get preoccupied with the future, or you allow your leaders to get preoccupied with the future, what happens is they lose the ability to lead their team, because their team's like, you're not even paying attention to all the crap we're dealing with. You just keep telling us it's going to get better. And if I get preoccupied with the present and I get too occupied with what's going on over here, then I can't lead, because nobody thinks it's going to get any better because we're stuck. So looking at the leaders that report into you, which of those extremes do they have a tendency to overly focus on, and then developing their ability to do the other one in balance to the one that's more natural to them.
Yeah, it's all about balance, and sometimes it's hard to tell when we're out of balance, but it's good to have good people working with us or for us who let us know. You've mentioned a couple of them already. Tell us about the 7 stages of CEO freedom.
Yeah, so you start out with an idea and a lot of passion, typically as an entrepreneur, and we call that the startup phase. Usually characterized by working a lot of hours, and you're trying to actually get some resonance in the marketplace. And when you start getting the ping out of the marketplace that there's some demand for what it is you're doing, we call that the ramp up phase, where you start to ramp up production. Then you get into the multiplication, where you start to add team members, and then you have to align the team. That's the team acceleration phase. And so those are the pieces that we've already talked about. When you start getting functional areas within your business, the problem with that is you start to get silos within your business. You've got a finance silo, you've got an operations silo, you've got maybe an IT silo, and the silos are more committed to the success of their function than they are to the business. Now, they wouldn't tell you that. What they tell you is, of course, I'm committed, but we actually don't measure them on the success of the business. We measure them on their goals. So the next phase is integration, where you integrate the team, where they value the success of the team more than the success of their department. They're actually willing to sacrifice their goals for the success of the team. You move from integration to strategic acceleration, because you can integrate it, but having a really great strategy And a lot of the work that I personally do now with entrepreneurs is around strategy. And strategy is not so much about what you're going to do, it's about what you're not going to do. We're not going to do these things. In other words, when we talked about complexity and simplicity, it's about how to strip out the complexity and focus on that which is most important to the business. And how do we stitch together the things that we can be better than anyone else at in such a way that we're not competing on someone else's playing field. We've created our own playing field. And ultimately, if you can do that, then you can reach the final plateau, which is what we call CEO freedom. So the first three phases are super simple. There's not a lot of friction, but when you pass from one phase to another, you enter an area of turbulence, and the business wants to get sucked back down to a lower level because it feels more comfortable at that level. I know what the challenges are at that level, but pushing to that level of turbulence to a different level requires a lot of effort from an entrepreneur and a founder. And so when you enter those periods of turbulence, that's the time when you have to recognize that this is natural. It's a natural growth process. And if I keep pushing forward and I'm doing it the right way, like if you've got a coach, you've got someone who's helping you with this, because otherwise what you'll do is just create more complexity. If you have less hours this year than you had last year, you're not scaling the business, you're growing it.
One of the things we talked about earlier was how difficult it can be once we've figured something out, how difficult it can be to turn it into a framework or a structure to help the people who are working for us figure out the same thing and help them internalized as well. How did you come up with this 7 stages framework?
By observing the clients that we work with. So a lot of times what happens is, and I've got a bunch of business books behind me. I don't know if you can see them all, but the interesting thing is that the reason why most business books are really thick is because no one will pay $20 for something that's that thick, right? So we have people who are in scholarly positions, they're professors, they're doctorate, and they make complicated things complicated. Making something simple is actually much more difficult. So what we do, we have the luxury of literally of having worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of leaders. And so you don't even have to be that bright. You just have to watch what works and what doesn't work. And the reality is that what works isn't that complicated, but nobody pays a lot of money for something that's not complicated. Let me put it this way. There is validation in the reason why I'm not successful being complex, because it's really hard. It's complex. That's why I haven't been able to do it yet. But if you go to anybody in any walk of life and you say, what are 3 things that I need to do every single day if I want to reach a level of mastery in this occupation, they'll be able to tell you what they are. And they're not complex. They're just damn hard to do every day because it's boring as hell.
Yeah, this is where I'll make my pitch for everyone going and reading Clausewitz. It's been a few episodes since I mentioned Clausewitz. Clausewitz wrote On War, which is kind of basically the strategy philosophy modern military still use today in developing strategy. And Clausewitz said, I'm paraphrasing from the English, never mind the original German. The Clausewitz said, everything in war is simple, but just because something's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Right. And that's something really important to remember is, 1, things don't need to be complex to be good, but 2, even if you make them simple, there still may be a lot of hard work that goes along with them.
Yeah. So I was working with a head of a foundation this morning, and they have about $200 million under management. And one of the things that we do, she said, what we do is really it's hard to explain to people. And I said, well, that's a problem. I said, you need to make it easy. And she said, but there's so much. And so the more you learn about what you do, we don't make it simple. We make it more complex, because the law of knowledge says that the more I know about something, the more complex I'm going to make it when I try to explain it to people, because I'm trying to explain to them what I know. They don't need to know what I know. What they need to know is what will help them bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be. And so I don't have to download all my knowledge to them. All I have to download is the piece that's going to help them bridge that gap.
Outstanding. So you mentioned how you're using AI a little bit at the Oxley Group. What other tech are you using, and do you have any other ways you're using AI that might be helpful to us?
Using it in, like I said, in strategy. We're using it to challenge people. Here's a quick coaching technique that I've used when leaders are having difficulty reaching someone. I'll say to them, okay, so get them to run a scorecard on their position, right? And then get them to have the AI engine ask them questions about their performance and evaluate what that should be. Ask the AI engine, what are reasonable expectations for my particular role? And so rather than what we would do as leaders, often we would present that to the person. If you can get them to bring that information to the conversation, two things have happened. First of all, it's their information then because they looked it up and they believe it. And second of all, they've had time to process it. And so, anything you can use with AI to get people to be more prepared for meetings with you about whatever subject, it's a good thing because they're going to come with rather than being at this level of knowledge, they're going to come at this level of knowledge.
I love that. Now, for anyone who's still with us from the beginning, way back at the top of the episode, we mentioned that you're an author, and we haven't talked at all about your books. Tell us a little bit about your books.
Well, we have a number of them, but the one that we're talked about the most is The 4 Faces of Frustration. And it is it's a book for anybody who manages the efforts of others, who's a parent, who's a salesperson, anybody basically who needs other people to help them be successful. If you don't need other people to help you be successful, this book is not for you. But if you want to make your relationship better, you want to make your sales better, you want to make your team better, it's a way to start recognizing when you're frustrating people. And the reason why this is important is that I, like many people, operated early in my life under the assumption that everybody looks like me, like I look when I'm frustrated. And I found out that that's not true. Everybody gets angry, but frustration shows up differently. Frustration is when, I might get angry, but then it ebbs after a little while and I start looking frustrated. Some people, when they're frustrated, start asking tons of questions. Some people, when they're frustrated, start ignoring the problem. Some people, when they're frustrated, remain looking angry, actually. And some people just stop talking. Well, if I'm not careful, if I'm a very effusive, talkative person, and I'm working with somebody who gets quiet when they're frustrated, I might actually think that they're perfectly on board with what we're talking about because they're not voicing any concerns. So, they must be good with it. But they're actually plotting my demise, actually. I just don't know. So recognizing when people are frustrated is the first step. Knowing what to do about it is the second step. And so once again, we have a very simple model. It's a 4-pole model that sort of talks about how people react to frustration and what you need to do in order to get them to admit what's actually happening with them and resolve the problem.
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice we might have ever gotten on this podcast is buried in what you just said. And it's, if someone's being really quiet, they might be plotting your demise. So either get them talking or get ready to defend yourself. So, Andrew, what's coming up for you in the next few months?
We've got a webinar next month that we're actually doing called the Leadership Blueprint, where we're going to be taking an hour and a half and helping people understand how to sort of bridge the gap between where they are and where they truly like to be. It's a perfectly complimentary webinar that we do for people. It's our gift to people. If they like what they want to hear, and they want to know more, they can sign up for our newsletter. But that's something we do every single month for our clients. And we're doing a lot of strategic planning right now with it being the beginning of the year.
All right. Well, everyone go check out the Leadership Blueprint. That sounds fantastic. Before we let you go, is there anything else you want to leave us with?
I would just challenge everybody. This is I think we're when will this podcast probably air, Jason?
This will probably go out in April.
Okay, so we'll be perfect. So we'll be starting the second quarter of the year at that point. And here's what I know about the second quarter. As a general rule, the energy that we had at the beginning of the year is gone. We're now into, the slug it out sort of part of the year. And we're like, man, we had all these cool goals and aspirations and things we wanted to accomplish. And we had all this energy at the beginning of the year. And a lot of times by April, it's sort of gone. So I would just challenge you to stop worrying about the Julian calendar, about the calendar year. Look at every quarter as a sprint. What can we accomplish in the next 90 days that would normally take us a year? People don't get bored and lose their energy because they're facing problems. People get bored and lose their energy because they're facing the same problems over and over and over again. Make it your resolution to make this next quarter different problems, bigger challenges, because you're going after something that really matters.
All right. I think that's a great place to leave it. I want to thank you for joining us today, Andrew. Where can everyone who's watching or listening find you so they can also thank you for joining us today?
If you go to transformingresults.com, that's transformingresults.com, you'll find us there, because we're not about coaching and consulting. We're about helping people change the results that they're experiencing in their life.
I love it. And we will link that up in the episode description. Thank you again for joining us, Andrew. I want to thank all of you for watching and listening. If you found this conversation with Andrew valuable, go ahead and share it with someone who can use it. Leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. You may be seeing this in your feed, but you may not be subscribed. And also, since I'm asking you for favors, if you're on a podcast platform and you can leave a review, we'd love it if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps build our audience and get these great conversations out to more and more people. We have a lot more interviews coming your way. Go out there. Do great things today. Onward and upward.